They always saw silence as surrender, a white flag, a lack of courage. But that's because they never knew how to weaponize it. They never understood that silence isn't the absence of power, it's its final form. The loud ones always needed noise to feel relevant. You learned to sharpen your presence in absolute quiet. When they laughed, you said nothing. When they doubted you, you nodded. When they pushed, you absorbed. They thought you broke. But you were just storing pressure. Because silence doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're focused. It means you've stopped wasting energy explaining yourself to people too shallow to understand. You stopped talking not because you ran out of things to say, but because you realized none of them deserved to hear it. And now something's shifted. They feel it, even if they don't have the words for it. You walk different. You move like someone who's been through war and won without ever firing back. They don't know what you're planning. They just know you're not reacting. And that scares them more than your anger ever did. Because when silence becomes deliberate, it's no longer passive. It becomes tactical. It becomes war. They tried to provoke you. They pushed your buttons, waiting for the outburst that never came. Because they needed you loud to discredit you. They needed you emotional to dismiss you. But you gave them nothing, just stillness, measured responses, calculated pauses. And in that silence, they started to lose their grip. They used to talk over you. Now they hesitate before speaking. They used to laugh freely. Now their eyes shift when you're near, because silence unnerves the loud. It steals their power without a single move. They thrive on attention, and when you deny them that, they crumble. You taught them that nothing is louder than the sound of being ignored by someone who used to care. And that's when they realized they never really understood who they were dealing with. You weren't retreating. You were realigning. You were building something they couldn't touch. A version of yourself immune to their noise. And now they hear the silence and they panic. Because silence means you're no longer trying to fix it. Silence means you're done. And when someone's done but still here, that's when the real danger starts. They talked for years. You built in minutes. And when the dust settles, only one of you walks out ready. Because silence doesn't mean you walked away. It means you stayed and chose violence with precision. They used to mistake your silence for emptiness. They thought you had nothing to say, nothing to prove, nothing to offer. But the truth is, you were saying more in your stillness than they ever said with all their noise. While they filled the air with shallow words and louder intentions, you were focused on one thing: impact. And impact doesn't come from volume, it comes from precision. You learned to say less and watch more. You tracked their moves while they ignored yours. You watched them build egos out of nothing. You watched them waste energy competing for attention while you sat back, loading the one thing that couldn't be ignored: results. They don't talk to you the same way now. The tone is different, softer, hesitant. They've started watching what they say around you because they've learned what silence really is. It's not absence. It's the sound of power growing in a place too quiet to detect. They underestimated the quiet one. And that's a mistake people only make once. You're no longer interested in explaining your rise. You're already above the people who thought they knew your limits. They speak to the old you in their heads, but that version doesn't live here anymore. You're done performing, done chasing understanding. Now, your silence walks into rooms before you do. And it makes more noise than their shouting ever did. They wanted weakness, you gave them war. You weren't hiding, you were hardening. Every insult they whispered when they thought you weren't listening, noted. Every time they cut you off mid-sentence, remembered. Every time your silence was called stupidity, fear, or weakness, it became fuel. Because real warfare doesn't start with a shout. It begins with preparation. And you prepared like a ghost. While they competed to be seen, you studied. While they bragged, you built. While they joked at your expense, you rewrote the rules they lived by. They thought silence was your ceiling. They didn't realize it was your strategy. You let them walk ahead, let them think they were leading, let them grow comfortable on fragile foundations. And now, those foundations are cracking because you're not stepping into their world anymore. You're reshaping it, one move at a time. Quiet, measured, devastating. This is what they never prepared for. Not noise, not confrontation, but clarity. The kind that shows up unannounced and changes everything. They don't know what you're planning next, and that's what terrifies them. You don't yell warnings. You leave silence behind, like a fuse already lit. They feel it now, the cold shift, the tension in the air when you walk past, the weight of your presence even when you say nothing, especially when you say nothing. And they finally understand. You weren't the quiet one. You were the loaded chamber. You no longer feel the need to respond, not because you've run out of things to say, but because you've realized that answers are overrated. That silence, when backed by vision, speaks louder than defense. They try to bait you. They want a reaction, a slip, some proof that they still matter to you. But your indifference is louder than rage ever was. You walk through rooms where once you had to prove yourself, and now, you don't even need to be noticed. The shift happened so gradually they never saw it, and now they can't undo it. You're not above them because you talk less. You're above them because while they wasted time performing, you were preparing. Every moment they spent trying to look powerful, you spent becoming powerful. Now they feel the distance, the one you never announced, the one you created brick by brick through discipline, solitude, and focus. And they're finally realizing that silence isn't the absence of battle. It's the art of waiting for the right moment to strike. Because you don't move on their time. You move when it counts. That's what makes you dangerous now. You're not trying to be louder. You're trying to be undeniable. And that's why they're nervous. Not because you changed, but because you stopped caring who noticed. If silence shaped you, subscribe, no words needed. They're not sure how to approach you anymore. The same people who once rolled their eyes when you spoke, now second guess every word they planned to say to you. They walk slower when you're around. They soften their tone. Because they don't know what you know, and they don't know who you are now. That version of you who used to overthink every sentence, buried, replaced by someone who doesn't need permission to exist. You no longer fill silence with nervous words. You let it stretch, let it breathe, because the more uncomfortable they get, the more clearly you see them. You've learned that most people don't talk to communicate. They talk to dominate, to distract, to perform. But you're done performing. You've stopped participating in games that require you to shrink. Now your silence bends rooms. It pulls attention without effort. It disrupts without violence. You walk into spaces where once you were ignored, and now you're studied, measured, respected. Not because you demanded it, but because they can't deny it anymore. They don't know what you're thinking, and that terrifies them. Because people who talk too much always fear the ones who don't. And you've become the quiet they can't tune out. You've stopped showing up for explanations. You're not here to convince anyone, not to defend your growth, your distance, or your peace. You've accepted a truth most people never will. You don't owe the world a performance. You don't need to narrate your every move. Power doesn't beg to be understood, it acts and lets the outcome speak. While they chased applause, you chased clarity. While they shouted to be heard, you built so quietly they forgot to block the door you'd walk through. And now they're scrambling to understand how you arrived here, but they missed it because they were too busy looking at people who shouted louder and ignored the one who said nothing and stayed moving. You walk differently now, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you finally have nothing to prove. They mistook your silence for absence, but what they didn't see was the war you fought alone. the battle they weren't invited to, the one that made you this still, this calm, this sharp. You're no longer in competition. You are in command. And the silence, it's not background noise anymore. It's the message, the boundary, the warning. Not everyone will understand, and that's exactly the point. They say they respect you now, but it's not respect, it's recognition of a threat. They don't admire your silence, they fear what it means. Because silence, real silence, only comes from people who've already fought wars inside themselves. You didn't choose quiet because you were weak. You chose it because you outgrew the need for noise. And that's the part they can't compete with. Now they pay attention, not because you asked them to, but because they have no choice. You've taken your power back, not by forcing it, but by removing access. They used to expect your presence. Now it feels like a privilege. You used to explain. Now they're left guessing. You used to chase peace. Now you've become the one who carries it, demands it, enforces it, with nothing more than how you move. There's no debate, no speeches, only facts, only distance, only results. And the ones who laughed the loudest, they're the ones who keep watching in silence. Not because you silenced them, but because you became someone they no longer know how to speak to. You didn't need to win the argument. You just needed to build a life where their opinions didn't apply anymore. And now, that's exactly where you stand. They talked, you listened. They mocked, you built. And now you stand in the same world they once tried to lock you out of. But you've changed the rules. Silently, permanently. You never raised your voice, and somehow it became the loudest thing in the room. Because silence, when earned, commands more than volume ever could. You didn't need to interrupt anyone to shift the power. You just stopped showing up for performances. You exited their stage, left their games mid-play, and let them keep the noise. You walked off and built your own arena. Now they watch from a distance, still loud, still desperate to be seen. But something about your silence keeps them unsettled. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know where you're going. And worst of all, they don't know how far ahead you already are. The difference now is simple. They need noise to feel important. You need silence to execute. You used to wonder if they were right about you. Now you realize they never saw the real you. They only saw what was loudest, most visible, most eager. But the strongest part of you was always quiet, always waiting, always preparing. You didn't just grow, you outgrew their language. And now, when you show up, the silence is the statement. It says, I don't need to explain. It says, I've arrived. It says, this is what happens when patience becomes power. You no longer explain. You no longer wait to be understood. You've learned that silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the rejection of it. It's not retreat, it's refusal. A clear decision not to engage with anything or anyone that doesn't match your focus. That's not weakness. That's warfare at its most disciplined. They tried to provoke you. You gave them stillness. They tried to drag you into chaos. You stayed centered. Now they're talking to themselves, arguing with your absence, reacting to the version of you that no longer exists. Because silence doesn't just shut down noise, it kills momentum. It slows down distractions. It clears the room. And when the room is clear, only the truth remains. And the truth is this: they can't touch you, not because you're hiding, but because you've risen above range. They underestimated you when you were quiet. They feared you when you stayed quiet. Now they regret ever thinking silence meant surrender. You didn't disappear, you just stopped responding. And that's when the war ended on your terms.